Raising teenagers is hard. Understatement of the century. This is Mentor Select. Mentor Select. Parenting teens to be successful adults. Mentor Select serves parents who are raising teens. Every week, Derich interviews leading experts that work with teens, educators, counselors, mentors, and authors to give you practical tips, strategies, and resources that you can incorporate immediately to better connect and understand your teen. All while parenting them to be successful adults, focusing on social and emotional development, something that's left out of the classroom, but not in ours. Be sure to subscribe, share, and rate. This is Mentor Select, and this is your host, Derich Phillips.
Welcome to episode 88 of the Mentor Select podcast. I am thrilled that you joined us this week for another phenomenal interview with our guest mentor. And just know that I'm praying for you and your family's safety as we're going through these uncertain times with COVID-19. But just hoping that these interviews serve as a highlight of your week and just an invaluable resource to help you better connect with your teens, to ultimately prepare them to be successful adults. Well, today, parents, you are in for a great treat. We have Tracey Maxfield with us. She is a retired nurse of 37 years, a published author, and a podcaster. How are you, Tracey?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, my pleasure. Glad we can have you join us. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Western Canada near Vancouver, and
Okay.
It's actually a beautiful sunny day. It feels like spring's on the way.
All right. Yeah, definitely. That's good. And does it get pretty cold in Vancouver?
Yes. Cold and snowy. Yes.
Right. So you're enjoying the sunshine, huh?
That's right.
You're officially the first Canadian that I interviewed, so I'm really excited.
Oh, cool.
Fantastic. So you worked as a nurse for 37 years. Can you tell us more about that experience? Or?
Yes. Initially did my nurse training when I lived in the United Kingdom. Then in 1987, I moved to Canada. And so I've nursed Canada, a little bit in the US and the UK. And everything has really been around the brain. So focusing on palliative care, mental health, gerontology, and I'm also a certified dementia specialist.
Wow. All right. Awesome. And then also you published a book. Tell us a little more about that book of yours.
So my book is Escaping the Rabbit Hole, My Journey Through Depression. It was actually published in April 2018, and I actually wrote it after I experienced an acute depressive episode with suicide ideation related to workplace bullying. So yeah, I wrote the book. I would say a message of inspiration and hope to others that they can get through it, but also that they're not alone.
Right. I think that's great for you to share your experience because, as you mentioned, working as a nurse, serving others that were maybe dealing with depression and mental disorders or illnesses, and then to find yourself battling something similar. Yeah, I'm sure that was a major transition for you.
My God, yes, it was a huge challenge because it doesn't matter how much you know or think you know. When you're actually going through the experience, I likened it to being in hell. And
wow.
It was extremely tough. And yes, writing the book was very cathartic. It did help me in my journey to recovery and moving forward.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. Awesome. Now, last but not least on your impressive resume, hosted a podcast. So tell us about your podcast.
Since my book was released, I've been working towards creating more education and awareness about mental health, mental illness, bullying, and suicide, primarily in children and teenagers. As you know, we're going through a huge crisis right now, just with the number of kids that are being bullied, but also those who are dying by suicide. And my work has been centered around that. So my websites, social media, my YouTube channel, and my blog posts. And it was lots of people just kept saying to me, you should do your own podcast. And so finally I made the decision to launch Engage, Educate, Empower. And as you know, you are a guest. It's a weekly podcast, and it's global. So I have people from Canada, USA, New Zealand, the UK. I have a Hollywood actor. I have a sports celebrity. I have politicians, teachers, doctors, and including teenagers. I have the whole gamut. And we're talking about mental illness and suicide and bullying, and how we can help foster self-love and confidence and empowerment to our kids so they can deal with all these adversities and struggles and move forward. And it's that learning point for parents and counselors and teachers to understand how they can help their kids.
Wow. Yes, certainly incredibly important. And it's, like I said, teens are dealing with, kids in general, dealing with so much. And I think a lot of it, their parents may not even realize that they're dealing with, especially as you mentioned about the kids that are losing their life to suicide. Yes. Can you talk more about how big of a problem that is?
Oh my goodness. So the interesting thing is, when I wrote my book, Suicide Amongst Kids was the rate of death. Since then, suicide amongst 5-year-olds to 24-year-olds is now the second leading cause of death. Wow. 5 years old. It's absolutely horrific, and they anticipate that when the study is released next year, it will be the leading cause of death. And just all you have to do is turn on the news, go to any social media site, and you're hearing either a child or teenager who's died by suicide because of bullying, and they actually call it bullycide, or it's related to school pressures, drugs, mental illness. There are so many things our kids are dealing with today, and I think because of their reluctance sometimes to open up to their parents or to an adult support person, that by the time they make the decision that life is better without them, it's hard. It's my heart goes out to parents. I would say get caught off guard.
Right.
What I'm trying to do is kind of try and help point parents in the right direction, that you need to look closely, but there are signs. There are very subtle signs, and it's easy to dismiss it as hormones or being difficult or going through a stage, but sometimes that is the sign your kid is giving you, and ways that you need to kind of jump on that without encroaching on their privacy, and which they don't like.
It's a fine line, huh?
It is a very fine line, and sometimes we have to go back to basics, core values and things that we can start reaching our kids again, because they are feeling lost and they're very confused and they're very overwhelmed.
I know I'm sure for the parents and for me, I felt just chills going through my body when you mentioned that kids as young as 5 are committing suicide.
I know.
Wow. So I'm sure parents are really caught their attention. They're thinking, okay, Tracey, what are some of those signs that they should be looking out for?
Everyone says, they may start talking about death or start giving away their possessions. That is with some of them, but with most of them, it is very much internal and the signs are very subtle. So you may notice that then they may be not as social or outgoing as they normally were. They may be taking time in their room longer than normal, and may even say to you, oh, I'm not feeling well, oh, I've got a project. Not necessarily. It's withdrawal, it's distancing themselves. Or they may go out, maybe onto the sports field or go for walks. They may just disappear for hours at a time, and you're wondering what's going on. Schoolwork they will notice a change. They will notice that either assignments are not completed or there's not that commitment.
Right.
And their grades are slipping. Social withdrawal, becoming more quiet, averting eye gaze. Very rarely will they actually meet you and look you in the eyes.
Oh.
That's another thing. And when you actually do look in their eyes, I always say you can always tell. Depression is the leading cause of suicide. And so if your child or teenager has depression, you will see that they have a smile that never reaches the eyes. We can all smile. A true smile crinkles the outer parts of the eyes. A depressed or a mental illness smile doesn't. It's a mask. And so it's observing their behavior. It's observing what they wear, what's going on in the home, because other things usually lead up to the suicide. And so it may be that you notice that their eating habits have changed, or alcohol or pills may be missing in the home.
Okay.
They may suddenly be wearing different clothing, like it may be warm and they're wearing long-sleeved clothing. That sometimes is an indication that they're starting to self-harm. And so that means they're cutting. And cutting is a form of expression and purging, of a way of trying to get rid of this emotional pain that they feel. They may actually get mean and nasty and cranky and irritable. And I think the challenge has been with many parents is that, as you know, with a teenager, they go through these mood swings.
Yeah, the roller coaster.
Right? It really is a roller coaster. And it's so much pressure. It really is on parents too, to be really in tune with what's going on with your child, regardless of whether or not they're a young child or they're a teenager or blossoming into a young adult. You know, it's those subtle signs of maybe you're talking about next, you know, where are we going for our vacation in 3 months, and they're not wanting to participate. Right? It's things like that. Or it's grandpa's 90th birthday. What do you think? Should we do a party? Well, I don't want to go. I'm not going to be there. You may just dismiss that as, oh, he's just being an insolent brat and he doesn't want to go. But it could be that in your teenager's mind, they've made the decision that they will die before then.
Oh, wow.
And so it's exploring those things. And so I think what parents have to try and be cognizant about it is, if you're noticing subtle changes, or if even other family or friends or teachers are saying to you, something's off, something's not quite right, that's when you have to take the opportunity to actually go and do some one-on-one time. And it's not, I think what we have to remember is you're not going to get much out of them the first time, because you know what kids are like. And so it's taking that time to go and show them that you love them and that you're going to be there for them regardless, and that you're supportive. And I've done lots of podcasts, and always somebody would say, what are your parting words? And I always say, as I end a podcast, to any parent or guardian, anyone who has a kid in their life, I would urge them to stop what they're doing, turn off the TV, get off the social media device, go and find your child and make contact with them on their own. And you know their boundaries. So if you can get away with touching or hugging or stroking or just, squeezing the shoulder, you do that. And you sit down on their level and you tell them how proud you are of them and how much you love them and that you will always be there for them. That's how important they are. And even though they may say, get off me, what are you doing? What's wrong? You're creeping me out. Don't take it personally. That's just their normal response. You go away. But at that moment, there's that little bit inside of them that recognizes that you've given them that love and that they are wanted. And that may be the moment where you stopped your kid from doing something.
Right.
And so it is. Every single teenager that has survived a suicide attempt has said they did it because they felt they were not loved, they were not important, and that their parents would not miss them if they left the world. As parents, your role is to confirm to them, hell yes, we will.
Right.
And it only takes, as I said, like 30 seconds. And if parents got into that consistent of expressing, okay, I'm sorry, sometimes you get on my nerves and I hate your hair and what are you wearing? But I got to tell you, I love you to bits. That's what the kids want to hear. Yeah. They really do.
They need it. Yeah. Wow. It's so powerful, and just providing that great insight, because I'm sure some parents are just, maybe they assume that their kids know that how much they love them and just how much they mean to them. But as you're saying, it's very important to express that consistently and not take for granted that they already know it.
Absolutely. And similarly, even if there's been grounding or a fight or something, or you didn't buy them something that they wanted, because love is not materialistic.
Right.
You have to take that time to explain, okay, so just because I grounded you for 2 weeks and I'm not letting you buy that new iPhone doesn't mean I love you any less. Because that's when things like that start to happen. That's when the kids get caught up in all that negative self-talk, which is really bad in the brain, and adults have that challenge too. And eventually you start convincing yourself that they don't like you because of a simple act. And it's up to you to have to reinforce that. Giving them everything they want is not an expression of love.
Right.
Right. And that's, I've had lots of parents who have said to me, what do you mean? He wants for nothing. I just brought him a brand new car. And I said, that's great. But do you actually sit down and tell him how much you love him and how proud you are? And the response I've said, he should know that. And I said, why should he know that? He's a kid.
Right.
His brain is not fully developed. You know, you're treating him as if he's an adult, when really he's not. He's a teenager, and he's still learning the ways of the world and how people interact. And you can't assume that he knows everything, because that's the problem. When you assume that they know, that's when things start falling apart.
Yeah. You bring up an incredibly important point in terms of, with kids and teenagers, their brain is still developing.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't really think that they have an adult, fully matured brain. They don't. And it's a book I had recently read called The Teenage Brain by Dr. Jensen. Have you ever read that book?
Yes, it's awesome.
All right, great book. So you should definitely interview her. I want to interview her as well. But it's an awesome book that really breaks down the science behind it and the development of a kid's brain.
Well, they say that a teenager's brain is high horsepower, poor steering.
Right.
Right? Because the frontal lobe is the last thing to develop. And in females, it doesn't fully develop until ages 21 to 24. And in males, it's 24 to 27. And that's why you have the risk-taking behaviors and them doing things without regard of what it could do, not only to themselves, but to others. And the taking the chances and, you know, the silly stunts. That's not because they're acting out. That's because their brain isn't telling them what to do, because it's not fully developed.
Right.
And I think the challenge has been is that in our mind, we have this image that at 18, they're an adult. Sometimes we give them responsibilities and legal things. At 16, the reality is you're not a fully formed adult if you're a male until you're age 24 to 27. And that explains an awful lot why there's so many males incarcerated and in gangs. And you know, it's you're putting way too much expectation and responsibility on kids that can't even begin to process the detrimental impact it has on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say, for me, that risk taking, I had that really bad growing up. I always say, I don't know how I survived my childhood and certainly early adulthood. And it makes sense now. Our brain wasn't developed fully yet.
And it is amazing though, and that's why insurance rates for cars are so high.
Right. Yeah.
They know that.
They know it. Parents need to know it as well. So that's personally awesome. Now, another source of just that stress and depression you mentioned is bully side.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
So what has happened is that kids today are being bullied more than they have ever been. We don't have, bullying's been around forever. Right. I mean, I was a child in the late 60s, 70s, and I was bullied as a child, although it is certainly nothing to what kids today are being subjected to.
Exactly.
The problem is, of course, social media. So not only do we have the bullying that could go on in the school, but we also have cyberbullying. And so most
That's
kids
global.
Most kids are now going through what they call the total bully experience. And that is that they do not ever have a break. It is 24/7, 7 days a week. There is no escape. And the bullying, because cyberbullying is so anonymous, it's taken on a new form in that they're creating fake identities and they're photoshopping photographs, and everything about the child or teenager can be shared around the world to strangers in the matter of minutes. And it's something that doesn't go away. And then, of course, you're dealing with all that, and then you go to school, and the bullies that are now in school, they call them the wolf packs. It's no longer the lone bully who was kind of like Nelson on The Simpsons, give me your lunch money or else. Now we have the wolf pack mentality, and the wolf pack mentality is usually a popular girl, because bullying amongst girls has tripled since 2014. And you'll have like the popular girl, and then she'll have all her friends, and sometimes there's boys too, who want to be in the popular girl's gang, and they will go and do her bullying at her behest, and that's why they call it the wolf pack. And so how do you think a 13, 14-year-old,
a lot to deal with,
right, in school, and maybe because usually the kids that are picked on are that they're different. So they maybe have like a big nose, or they may be overweight, or they may be of an ethnic minority, they may be of a different religion, they may be LGBTQ, or they may have a disability. It could be a learning disability, physical, or it could be that they have a mental disorder. They may have an obsessive compulsive or a tic, or they may have an eating disorder, but they have something that makes them different. And that's who they prey on, because bullying is power and control. And so they pick on someone who's different and weaker. So you're already going through something. You're very cognizant of what that is. And then you have like 5 girls who bully and threaten and intimidate you every single time you go to school, and there's no escape. You can't run to the washroom because somebody will follow you. And then you go to, and then you go maybe out into the schoolyard, and they'll be there. They'll be on the bus. There's no escape. And what they're finding is that this relentless stress and pressure, not only is it changing the shapes of the developing brain, they're actually finding it stunts brain growth and development, but it sets up what we call the inflammatory response. It's the new term is toxic stress.
Right.
And what happens is, we all know what the flight, fight, fright mode is. That's our danger mode. Your brain automatically goes into danger mode. You want to protect yourself when you want to escape from the bullies. But when that is all the time, your brain never comes off that hypervigilant mode. And it's likened to the old record players where the needle is stuck in the LP and it keeps just going round and round and the needle is stuck. And that's what they're likening this form of toxic stress. Your brain is on hyper alert, hypervigilant mode. And when you do that, it's just flooded with these chemicals, huge inflammation, and it just goes all, because the brain and body are connected, it goes up and down that brain body pathway and just floods your body constantly. And so, not only do you have like sadness and anger and frustration and suicidal thoughts and things, but you also have headaches, nausea and vomiting and stomach pains, and it's so many other things that present as physical side effects
physical effects.
Right. And so, usually if you have a child that keeps saying, I don't want to school, I feel sick, I have a tummy ache, day after day after day, you've got to start questioning, is this child being victimized at school?
Right.
Because it's usually the physical will show up way more quickly as the child tries to make sense of how they're feeling in their head. And so, it is the emotional crying, and I don't want to go to school, and my tummy hurts, and my back hurts, and I feel sick. And they'll go to the doctor, and the doctor will say, nothing wrong with them. But there really is, because They're trying to process. The body and the brain is trying to make sense of, why can't we get out of this vigilance? What is going on?
I think that's similar too with soldiers returning from war with post-traumatic stress syndrome.
100%. EMT responders, policemen, this is what they're finding. And actually, so depression and anxiety are the most common mental disorders that a child or teenager who's been bullied will deal with. Ultimately, that will result in post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wow.
And that's scary. That's
very scary. Yeah.
Are being treated for post-traumatic stress disorder related to the onslaught of bullying. And as I said, that's something that we have to deal with now because, well, today I've just heard of another child that died because of bullying, chose to end his life. And it's so common that the name they gave it is bullycide. It helps differentiate between suicide and bullycide. Suicide directly related to bullying.
It's definitely terrifying. And being that you are going into the schools and speaking to kids and parents and working with them, what are some effective ways that you see schools and parents combating bullycide?
I mean, the most effective that I've seen is when you have schools, like the law says that every single school should have a no bullying policy, and it should be displayed all around the school for anyone to read when they enter.
Right.
And then there's consequences of the bullying. So what do they do if you bully? The best effect has been the schools that deal with the bullying as soon as it's reported. And they call it restorative justice. So it's not penalizing the bully and saying you're expelled for 3 weeks. We'll see you in 3 weeks. Because ultimately, when the bully comes back, then there's vengeance.
Even angrier, yeah.
Right? And so it's restorative justice. And so the way they do that is obviously the bully victim is going to be counseled and there's help that the victim will need. But every behavior has a reason. And so we have to think that maybe, the pretty girl who has all her gang bullying others, she may have daddy at home who's abusing her. Right. We don't know. Right?
Hurt people.
Exactly. And bullying is also a way of transplanting your pain onto another person to make them feel as bad as you do. And so restorative justice is actually counseling and working with the bully to understand that what they did was wrong, but also explore, is there a reason? And then working strategies on how can you best manage your emotions? And when you're feeling angry and when you're feeling unloved, instead of it transferring into this, get all my gang and let's go and intimidate someone.
Right.
And when you have schools and parents and the PTA especially that buy into that with the kids, it has a much more positive effect. But also when the school reinforces that you become an upstander, not a bystander. So a bystander, they are now saying, is just as harmful as the bully because their actions are sending a signal that it's okay. But if you become an upstander, they have found that if someone stands up to a bully, 45% of the time the bully will mute and walk away.
Okay.
And so it's the schools that are now promoting upstanders. Be an upstander. Stand up for someone else. Take that person that's being bullied and take them off to a safe spot and offer them positive reinforcement and then take them and help them report it. But that's having a huge impact because we know that when you take the wind out of a bully's sails and they realize that the effect that they want is not going to happen, then it immediately deflates them.
Right.
And so those are the schools that seem to have very little bullying activity and also very low rates of bullycide.
Wow. Awesome. Yeah, I love that because traditionally we look at, the bully themselves is more of the villain and, hey, just expel them or get them out the picture, but they need help. And
they need help.
Right.
And what happens is if you don't give them help, they will either go on and engage in criminal activity. They'll turn to
Right.
drugs or alcohol. They will inevitably, because of what they're going through, end up with a mental illness.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, bullies, there's a very high risk of untreated bullies by the time they get into young adulthood of actually ending their life by suicide.
Yeah, because the consequences are going to get more severe, and they don't know how to process their anger and deal with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
it just goes to one extreme. So, bullying, the next step may be, let's use a weapon. The
Right.
next step will be, well, let's actually now really hurt someone. It still doesn't make me feel good. Well, I'm going to try something else. They're never, ever going to get to that point where they will feel their pain is gone until they start going through, the medical system and having therapy and beginning to understand what's happening to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, certainly listening to you, it's clearly you're so passionate about this topic and you have the expertise, but you really have a gift of explaining complex issues, or topics like the brain, but you make it so easy to understand. So it's truly one of your gifts, and I'm really looking forward to listening to your podcast, and that's going to be excellent.
Thank you.
As we get ready to wrap up this interview, one thing I want to go back to that you mentioned earlier, as far as that balance between parents really being in tune with what their kids are doing, but also balancing their privacy, their kids'
Yes.
privacy. And I know a lot of parents may think my kids' privacy, they don't have any privacy. They're in my house. Can you talk more about the importance of the balance?
So, I mean, kids, every human being is entitled to an element of privacy. And teenagers especially. And I think the balance is that you have to respect what they're doing. And I think the challenge is there are certain areas where you have to sit down and explain to them, I respect your privacy. However, I'm really concerned that you're on the computer or phone all the time. Let's talk about cybersecurity. And I think that's where you need to open the door to, you do understand that there are people masquerading as kids when really they're pedophiles, human traffickers, sexual predators. And so talking about cybersecurity, and it may be, I'm not going to snoop in your room. I'm not going to snoop, but I'm going to install something on your computer. Or once a week, I'm going to sit down with you and together we're going to look at the sites you go to. At that point, it sends a message to the kids that I'm not prying and I'm not being sneaky. I'm going to be very open with you.
Right.
And I think that's the thing. The same as if you suspect that they're taking drugs or alcohol because things are missing in the house. You can't accuse, because as soon as you accuse, you're going to break trust. And so it's that opportunity to have that one-on-one. And I keep reinforcing one-on-one, because if you sit down at the kitchen table, and not a lot of families do that anymore, but if you sit down at the kitchen table and begin that dialogue, you're not going to get the answer you want. In fact, you're going to get them retaliating and getting even more upset.
Right, they're defensive.
And it is. And then that breaks your relationship again. And so it's that one-on-one, and it's that understanding and trying to break down that barrier. And we talk a lot about the parents needing to have time for themselves and, having date nights.
Right.
I always encourage parents, regardless of how old your child is, you should have date nights. And you may not, obviously you don't want to call it date nights, but you want to call it's one-on-one time where you are with your child or teenager and you go into a fun activity, and it enables them to see you on their level.
Right.
And it's the fun, it's the giggles, even if you're talking about, oh gosh, when I was dating your father, you never guessed what he did, right? It's that breaking down barriers, that they're starting to see that you are human. Right. And that you get it. And that can lead into maybe some of the tough conversations of, how is your friend? Or the teen may open up to you about a friend and some of the challenges they're going through. And that starts opening dialogue that you can then work with them. And hopefully that'll enable them, when they feel that you have that trust and they have that important time together, because it shows that you're giving up your time to be with them. And that you will have no idea how important that is to a kid. Right. Even though if they say, I want to be with my friend, deep down, the fact that you've given up time to do something that they enjoy and want to be a part of, it does start breaking down barriers, and you will find that they will become more open or may come to you unexpectedly and share something very, very private or, very alarming to them that they need to share with you. And that is the best compliment your kid can ever give you. When they feel comfortable enough to start opening up and confiding or asking your guidance. That is the gift.
Priceless.
It is. And embrace it. But you have to work for it. You really have to work. For some people, just based on the way the family is, it's very natural. But for others, especially if it's really busy or a single parent, it's a little more difficult. But it is trying to set aside that time, because it'll come back to you in so many positive benefits.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's incredible insight and guidance. Now, you already gave us your parting words of advice, but as we get ready to wrap up this interview, could you share some resources or additional tips for parents to help them better connect and just implement some of the strategies that you mentioned throughout the interview?
Well, I mean, it's probably going to have to be a shameless plug about.
Please do that.
Okay,
so shameless about it. It's a resource, a great resource.
I have a website, www.traceymaxfield.com, and if they go on there, there is every single resource for children and teenagers about suicide, mental illness, bullying, LGBTQ. I have a section on articles about bullying and mental illness in kids. And it's great not only for kids to read, but for parents. There's tips how to talk to your teen. And also I have a weekly blog post and YouTube video, comes out every Monday. Okay. And it's specifically related to mental illness and bullying in children. So, for example, the one that just came out on Monday is CBD oil an appropriate treatment for mental illness in kids? Okay. The one that comes out next Monday is on teen dating abuse, what parents need to know. And in it, I go through the facts, I go through the signs, what to look for, and then always at the end, it's what can a parent do? It's tips on how they can deal with it and how they can work with their child or teenager to figure out, am I being abused? What can we do to help you? Where do we go, etc.
Okay. Wow. That sounds like a phenomenal resource. I'm certainly signing up as soon as we get out this podcast. And yeah, I'll certainly, and anytime encounter a parent who's maybe dealing with those issues with their teens, I know where to send them. So that's going to be a great resource.
Thank you.
Awesome. Now, with your podcast, any other, what are some other best ways to contact you?
Actually, if they go onto my website, there's all the links to my social media site.
One-stop shop.
How to get my book. It's one-stop shop. And then also, if they need you to contact me, there's a contact form and they can directly email, and I will definitely respond.
Fantastic. Well, parents, I highly encourage you to reach out to Tracey. Clearly, she's a wealth of resources and expertise, and she's truly passionate about this topic. So, as I always say, it takes a village, and we want to be able
Certainly does.
Get as many resources as possible. Thanks again, Tracey. This was a phenomenal, value-packed interview. And like I said, I'm looking forward to listening to your podcast every week.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Mentor Select. Mentor Select. Parenting teens to be successful adults. Hosted by Darrich Phillips. Raising teenagers is hard. Understatement of the century. We get it. That's why Darrich interviews leading experts that work with teens, educators, counselors, mentors, and authors to give you practical tips, strategies, and resources that you can incorporate immediately to better connect and understand your teen. That's why we do the show. Be sure to share Mentor Select with other parents of teens. Follow us on social media at Mentor Select to stay up to date on the latest tips, strategies, and resources for parenting teens. Send your questions and comments to darich@mentorselect.com. Tune in every Wednesday for new episodes. Till next time, this is Mentor Select.